Hello and welcome back to the next report. This is Shaggy. Thomas is not going to be joining us today. I'm going to be flying solo on this episode. This is episode number 107, and today I'm going to take a little bit to talk about some tech-related things and events that have happened in 2016, good and bad. But before I get started with the podcast and the main topic, I want to give a shout out to Thomas and a big congratulations, as he's I think as of this week started his new job, and hopefully that's going well for him, and I wish him the best of luck. Anyway, moving along, I think we'll go ahead and get into the main topic, the meat of the video and podcast. So recently, Thomas and I talked a little bit about it, and I've looked up a bunch of information, and this is a topic that I'm excited about. AMD has been spending the last, I think, probably two and a half years on developing a new processor architecture that's going to be the head of their company for not just the enthusiast market, but the mainstream and the low-end, low-power segments. It's codenamed RYZEN now. For probably about a year, rumors were going around with the name of Zen. So it's kind of still there. It's just added onto. It's now RYZEN instead of Zen. Most people, when you look at it, you would expect it to be pronounced like Risen or something like that, but it's pronounced RYZEN. Anyway, for the chip that's supposed to come out beginning of 2017 and first quarter sometime, the top of the line enthusiast level, what we know about it so far, at least from specs or specifications, are it's supposed to be about 3.4 gigahertz or higher. They claim 3.4 plus gigahertz, and I'll get into that in a little bit, why there's the plus there. 8 cores, 16 threads, so it's actually a new architecture similar to what Intel has with all of their core series parts and Xeons, where it's hyper-threaded, except it's not hyper-threaded. That's an Intel technology. It's called hyper-threading. This just has 2 threads per core, the same type of architecture, but it doesn't have the same name. It's just simultaneous multi-threading is what it's referred to as, which the previous architecture that's been kind of not necessarily pushing AMD forward, AMD's been kind of dragging it with them for the last 5 or 6 years now, was clustered multiprocessing instead of simultaneous multiprocessing. A little bit of a different ideology. I think in some past podcasts, Thomas and I have kind of gone into it, and I've explained some details about what the architecture is, why it's different from SMP or SMT. I'll try to use those acronyms so that way I don't blurt out a whole name and bore you to death all day with long words. But like I said, I've gone into that in the past, why it's different and what about it is different and things. And AMD is moving forward with this new architecture, and hopefully, and I'm hopeful about this, and I think that this is going to be a giant leap forward for them in terms of what they can do, what's possible with their hardware now, rather than being stuck with an architecture that is now 5 years old. So that's going to provide a ton of benefits. And another one of the things is alongside a 20 megabyte level 2 and level 3 cache, combined cache, it's built on a new manufacturing process, which AMD has been using for their GPUs this year with what they've released new. It's 14 nanometer FinFET technology, or manufacturing technology, I should say, which enables them to cram a shit ton more transistors into a smaller package, a smaller process. And the die size should be smaller as well. Is my webcam just going crazy? Hope not. Here, get that to be a little bit more solid. I think that's better now. Sorry for that, guys. Anyway, I'll just jump into the feature set that's supposed to be a part of this new processor. Along with all the actual raw hardcore specs, there's also a bunch of the features that are going to be in this new CPU, architecture. The new architecture is supposed to support DDR4, which has been out on the market for about a year and a half, 2 years. I'm not 100% sure when it first came out, but it's fairly recent. And the prices for that are coming down too, so it's getting a little bit more easily accessible. But it's also the architecture is also capable of PCI Express Gen 3 or PCIe Gen 3, 3.0, whatever you want to refer to it as, which Intel has had for 4 or 5 years now. So AMD is kind of catching up on that. It's also going to support USB 3.1, NVMe type SSDs, which is going to grant great performance benefits if you decide to use a PCIe based SSD. I've talked about those in the past as well. Basically, read and write speeds are like twice that of what SATA is capable of through the bus. And it's not really a SATA limitation. It's the bus that's being used. Also, SATA Express is going to be available in this new architecture. And then there's a chunk of new things that are being injected into this. And I'll try to post a link and update this description and post a link to a site that I use a lot called Anantech. They cover a lot of technology, and they usually go into a lot of detail and in depth when they're covering some things like that. Similar to Tom's Hardware, but I'm not a big fan of Tom's Hardware. So anyway, AMD is including a ton more technology into this, what they're calling AMD Sense MI. And what's lumped into this Sense MI is a bunch of things. There's pure power, which is one of the things that's going to help with controlling power efficiency, helping between thermals and frequency, and helping voltage to help level all of those things and take all those things into consideration and help get the best power efficiency out of this chip possible. There's also precision boost, which is a new take on what AMD has used in the past called turbo boost. So, and one of the things, this is part of what that plus 3.4 plus gigahertz is referring to, is that there's in effect a turbo boost, but it's not the same kind of turbo boost that we're used to. This turbo boost in the past usually just can ramp up to a particular limit clock speed, and then that limit is a hard limit. So this is kind of similar to what, at least from my interpretation, now I could be totally wrong on this, but I think I'm right. My interpretation of this is it's going to be similar to NVIDIA's GPU boost. If you're familiar with that, NVIDIA has, and more specifically 2.0, GPU boost 2.0. The older GPU boost wasn't quite as dynamic. But this new GPU boost that's in NVIDIA's GPUs, and a lot of them you can take, and if you slap on some like liquid cooling or something onto a GTX 1080 or something like that, the GPU boost will be able to take and see, hey, my cooling efficiency has gone way up. My chip is running nearly as hot, so I have thermal headroom. And providing that I also have power headroom, then I'm going to upclock myself dynamically, overclock, until I can't overclock anymore effectively. So I've seen some GTX 1080s, normally out of the factory, the clock is somewhere in the realm of 1.6 gigahertz, which is unheard of for GPUs. It's starting to get ramp up higher and higher for clock speeds on GPUs, but and I've seen some 1080s go up to 2+ gigahertz on the core clock. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it's crazy. And if they're going to start applying this type of technology to processors, it's going to be crazy what it's going to be possible of push past its normal limits, providing that there's thermal and power headroom. But anyway, back to the precision boost is what it's called. Between the dynamicy of allowing it to clock as high as it can, with that and a couple of these other features, AMD has also enabled the ability to fine-tune your frequency when you're doing some overclocking manually, down to chunks as low as 25 megahertz, which normally, unlike Intel CPUs or AMD CPUs, you usually just adjust the multiplier first because that's the easiest thing to do without even touching voltage or the block frequency and stuff like that. You can just change the multiplier and say, hey, instead of 20, I'm going to go to 24. So based on your block setting, it's going to jump up from, I don't know, 800 megahertz or something. Most things are 200 megahertz for the block. It's BLCK is what I'm referring to. But AMD is enabling the ability to go as low as 25 megahertz for each bump that you want to do. Between this and then another technology called extended frequency range, or XFR, this is what's allowing it to do the dynamic turbo boost based on the thermal and power limits, and just go rocket up as far as it can. Now, a feature that's been in Intel CPUs for a long while now is, and I mean this is just something that's in CPUs in general anyway, is the ability to prefetch a instruction. And if you're not familiar with an instruction or the breakdown of how CPU interprets commands from the user or an application or something when you're sitting typing away on a keyboard, or you're doing web browsing or something like that, everything is broken down into the smallest block. Smallest block, and it's called an instruction. And an instruction, depending on the architecture, there's also different types of CPU architectures. There's x86, and then there's ARM. There's all kinds of others. ARM is generally used for like mobile phones and tablets and stuff like that. But there's also x86, which is generally your desktop or laptop type platforms. And those types of instructions have varying widths. So if I get down into too much more detail, it's going to get a little bit wicked. But a base instruction has certain segments, and based on the bit width, will tell it what it's supposed to do, whether it's supposed to add two numbers together, or it's supposed to take and multiply two numbers together, or do some sort of encryption, or whatever. There's a bunch of different instruction types of instructions available based on the new x86, or not new, but the x86 architecture. And they're adding, I don't think they're adding any new features with this, but they could be. I don't know. I don't develop on that level. So so let's go back here. In combination with the smart prefetch, AMD also has what they call neural net prediction. I gotta type something up real quick here. Think and talk and type all at once. Sometimes it's very difficult. I'd end up typing what I'm thinking or talking about, so it defeats the entire purpose of trying to say something else while I'm typing. Anyway, back to the neural net prediction and smart prefetch. The smart prefetch, in combination with this neural net prediction, helps be able to. So the prefetch is going to get the type of instruction that's coming in for the CPU. And like I said, this is a feature that's been in CPUs for a while, but they're trying to change the way that it interprets the type of instruction that's coming in. It's basically going to give the CPU the ability to guess what type of instruction it is, and then say, hey, this looks like something that already happened about 2 minutes ago or something like that. I already have this data available because I saved it. This is what I'm trying to do. Here's your data. You don't even need to go through the process. You just move on. Just go over. Your line is over there. It's like having a fast lane checkout kind of thing, or self checkouts. You already know what you need to do. You just go there, pay for it, done. And neural net prediction is also going to take, in combination with smart prefetch for the things like the data that's already stored and things that are already preloaded. The neural net prediction is going to be able to take an instruction and find the fastest path through the CPU. And normally, instruction will follow a hard-coded set path, and it's always going to go this direction. Unless it's a separate type of instruction, then it might take a slightly different route, but it's always going to follow that slightly different route for that type of instruction. This is going to enable the CPU to kind of open up a little bit more and say, hey, I'm going to run all these different things through my 8 cores, threads, however many there are there, and just blitz through this program. And that is going to help with a lot of real CPU intensive type tasks. And it's going to really, really push the boundaries of what a CPU is normally capable of, I think. That's the set of features that I have seen listed from AMD's marketing material, and from what I've seen on AMD didn't give me anything. Just going to throw that out there right now. I have to dig things up myself. But from the sites that I've looked at, like, for example, Anantech and things like that, these features are what's going to enable the Zen CPU to perform as well as it supposedly has in these benchmarks that have been pushed out. The one that AMD did for their actual live reveal event, they took I think it was a Broadwell, a Broadwell E chipset, or not Broadwell. It's one of the latest gens. It's the 6900K. I don't remember which code name it was, but they took the 6900K and benchmarked it up against AMD's, I think what they're referring to as SR7, the AMD SR7, which will be the 8-core, 16-thread model that I've been talking about a little bit in this podcast here. Benchmarked it, did a clock-for-clock comparison with both of them at 3.0 gigahertz, because they had to downclock the AMD processor and to keep it at the same clock as Intel. And on a Cinebench rendering demo, it was able to beat it by just a slight few seconds. And what that shows is that AMD, or Intel's latest, one of their highest end CPUs, is actually slower than AMD's newer Zen SR7 that's coming out. Now, granted, they had to downclock and they had to do some things weird, and that is still an engineering sample. And what that means is that an engineering sample is something that's still kind of being validated and verified by quality control and things like that. It's not something that's in mass production that's coming out to users. So there could be issues, so it could actually perform better when it comes out in mass production, or they might have a slight flaw and they actually have to change the frequencies a little bit and could drop it down, and performance could actually be slightly worse when it comes out. It's kind of a up in the air situation with that actually physically being there, knowing how the processor works and stuff like that. With knowing what we know right now, it looks like that this is going to really give Intel a run for its money. And from a consumer perspective, this is something that we've needed for a long time from AMD, because Intel's kind of has the market cornered at something. I'm just going to throw a figure out there for an estimated, educated kind of guess, at around 80%, 85% market share of the processor market for laptops and desktops. It's basically, they have the market cornered almost. And if they continue down that path and AMD doesn't do something like they're doing right now, then we could see a situation with a monopoly, and then prices are just going to go poof, and then it's gonna hurt the consumer. AMD has been sticking it in there for a little bit and just kind of holding on, but it's not where they need to be. And thankfully, with this new processor architecture, along with the giant revamp that they've done with the GPU, their GPU segment, their GPU department internally, I think they're looking real good for next year. So now I'm going to move on to past that, and not bore you with any more technical details, even though this looks really awesome. It's really promising. There's a bunch of nerds out there that are going to be going crazy too. So I'll get into some more things that Thomas and I had talked about a little bit. We might talk about this in a future episode a little bit more. That way we have a couple of hosts and stuff like that, so we can bounce ideas off like we normally do. But I wanted to talk about some of the moments of 2016 that I thought were, at least in my opinion, were the best moments of 2016, or my favorite moments. And the first one that came to my mind when I was typing up some notes for this podcast was the legalization, or the equality of marriage that the Supreme Court ruled. It's been something that's been fought about in the U.S. for a while now, and me personally, I don't think it should be something that's legislated by the government. And the fact that we now have the ability, someone, if they're gay or straight, it doesn't matter, or if they're bisexual, they can do whatever they want. It's not something that the government needs to be in. That's their personal time. That's something they're going to do away from work. It's not going to affect the public. So, I mean, it's a good moment in 2016, I think, and I'm glad it happened. Now, this one could be controversial, but and I did kind of get into it for a little bit, but another one of my favorite moments of 2016, or favorite things of 2016, I guess it kind of is a thing too. It was the release of Pokemon Go and Pokemon Go itself. I played it for a little bit on my phone before I got my OnePlus phone, just before my Asus phone started doing some weird things with the screen and whatnot. And turns out it's a very addictive game. But along with all of the fun and what Niantic and the Nintendo has done with Pokemon Go to get people out of the house and active and being able to go out and be social at the same time, it's kind of done some bad things in terms of, I mean, not necessarily they've actually done something, but they've kind of given a trigger for things that are already there, for kids that take their phones and then they'll not pay attention and just start walking into the middle of the street or something like that and just get smacked by a car or a truck. I don't know how many times I read news articles and stuff like that from people just getting smacked by a truck, or walking out in the street, or not paying attention and just playing Pokemon Go. So, I mean, it didn't trigger, it wasn't the cause, but it kind of opened the floodgates for it, and for the actual issues to start popping up. So, another thing that happened in 2016 was VR started to become kind of more mainstream. At least I think it did. This is one of the things that AMD's kind of hit on, and NVIDIA too. Both companies have been really pushing for it. And with AMD's GPU releases that they've had this year, they've had a big focus on VR. And then there's more and more laptops that are coming out that are VR focused and stuff like that. The PlayStation has a PlayStation Pro that's VR capable, that's supposed to be out, or is coming out very, very soon. I think it just came out. And then the Xbox One S and the Xbox Scorpio that's going to be coming out, I think, next year. is 4K capable. Now, the difference between the Sony PlayStation 4 Pro and then Xbox One S and how 4K is displayed on the screen versus for like a Blu-ray or a game. For the PS4 Pro, depending on the game, it is capable of actually rendering the game at native 4K. The Xbox One is not. And what it does to cope with that is it actually takes the game and then renders it at 1080p and then upscales that content from 1080p to 4K. But it is able to actually stream and play movies at 4K, like a Blu-ray or something like that. Now, granted, if you're going to be streaming something like that, you need to have a fairly decent internet connection. And I don't think mine really will support it. If it was only one device streaming it, then it'd be a different story. But we have my wife's beast PC computer that I built her. We've got a Chromecast downstairs, and she's usually watching things down there. And then I've got my PC, and I'm always doing things with this one, my Raspberry Pi, and then my laptop over here, which is what I was using for the show notes. So yeah. Another thing I thought was real big about 2016 was all the comic book movies that came out. Now, this has been something that's been going on for the last 3 or 4 years, especially with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but this year saw even more releases from DC as well as Marvel, and I collected 5 movies that I thought were real big, or the biggest hits out of 2016. And I just realized I did not put one on this list that should have been on this list and probably should be the top on the list. Oh well. Not in any particular order. I'm just going to name off the 5 that I have on my list, and then I'll say the 6th one, which is probably the top. There's Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, X-Men, Apocalypse, Captain America, Civil War, Suicide Squad, and Doctor Strange. And that's what I had on my list written down. And then the one that I forgot that I'm probably going to catch flack for if I told somebody is Deadpool, because Deadpool came out in February this year. And I forgot because it's been such a long time ago. But that one was, out of that list, that one was probably my favorite out of this year. And then Captain America is probably the second favorite. But in terms of which one was better in the box office and all that, and which one was the best hit, it was probably Deadpool. Another event that's kind of happened, this is kind of starting to transition into the things that aren't necessarily happier things, but one of the other funny events that's happened more recently in 2016 is the whole situation with Samsung Galaxy phones and Samsung latest Note phones all exploding, all because of the batteries, which honestly they should have done something about that to actually develop the battery technology better than what they did, but it is what it is. Samsung's not been had a great reputation for quality of their phones for a little while. I mean, their highest end phones, yes, but like the lower end phones and then the cheap phones, the quality is just terrible. And maybe that's partly due to the actual cost of the phone and the cost that they're making it. They're not willing to put a little bit of extra time and effort into making a better quality phone. But when I had a Samsung phone years ago, I wasn't a big fan of all the bloatware and the things that are just loaded onto Samsung phones. I guess they've been getting better about that nowadays. I think Thomas could speak to that a little bit because I know he had a Note 5 for a while. And I've had some friends that have Galaxy phones, and they've been saying that some of that bloatware is not there anymore. So that's, I guess, a good thing. But exploding batteries are not a good thing. Not at all. And last thing I have on my list, and I kind of left it for last because I was debating whether or not to actually bring it in, with this podcast, but I wanted to take a moment to talk about, or at least the people that I had listed that I came to mind when I was typing up the show notes was the people that had died in 2016, at least celebrities, famous people. There was Prince, David Bowie, that was a big one. Alan Rickman, that was a big one. I mean, obviously a very good actor. And it's funny, I hadn't even seen Die Hard up until this year when a buddy of mine invited me over to his house, and we went over and we watched it. And he claims it's the best Christmas movie ever. And, I mean, it's not 100% related to Christmas, but it's in Christmas time. So, and then lately I've been seeing on Facebook a bunch of memes that it's not Christmas Eve until I see Hans Gruber, Alan Rickman's character, falling off of Nakatomi Plaza. So it's fairly amusing. But and then a couple more were Lemmy from Motorhead, and then Gene Wilder, and of course there were many more that passed away in 2016. And there's also a meme for this too, and you've probably seen it on Facebook, or you can look it up. But 2016 has just been kind of a crap year. Even Time magazine was making fun of it by putting a picture of the Grim Reaper for the person or man of the year when it's actually Donald Trump, which is surprising. I didn't put that on my list of events in 2016 because that didn't make me very happy, but it happened. So anyway, that's all I've had for today. I'll probably work with Thomas to try and get the audio version of this uploaded, but if you guys watch this on YouTube, I'm obviously live right now, so you'll see me now, or you can watch it on YouTube later. And as always, thanks again. Keep watching. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check us out on Facebook. I mean, we're on all social media platforms pretty much. We also have our own website, thenextreport.com. Thomas keeps a lot of content on there for you guys. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.